Acer has made one pretty confusing choice with this Nitro V15 laptop, and that's the power profiles. This £1,000 machine is rocking a Ryzen 7 7735HS 8-core 16-thread chip with 16GB of DDR5 RAM, an RTX 4060 laptop GPU with 8GB of VRAM, and a pretty measly 512GB SSD. That spec is generally fine, save for the now tiny SSD, although we'll get back to that later, but what's confusing is the power profile. Take a look at this list of GPU power limits. On even a last-gen Nitro V, an RTX 4060 laptop GPU can push up to 140 watts of power, but on this thing, it gets just 75 watts. That's almost half the power, and so unsurprisingly, it performs about half as good. Well, not quite, but you get the idea. Oh, and no muck switch either. While we're at it too, the CPU is limited to a maximum of 65 watts in the maximum power mode, or more like 45 watts while gaming. Considering it's an AMD chip though, that actually isn't too bad, but it's still on the lower end, as you'll soon see. Performance-wise, in games anyway, you can expect pretty mediocre performance across the board. In CS2, it's at the bottom of the chart, even in the painfully loud performance mode. In fact, it's even lower than the RTX 4050 equipped Nitro V I reviewed a little while ago. That's kind of embarrassing. In Cyberpunk, it's a little better, beating out an equally power-limited RTX 4070 in the Schenker Vision 16 Pro, and that 4050 Nitro V, although still far ways away from other 4060 laptop-based machines like the Core 16 and the Focus 16, and even Acer's Helios Neo 16. Shadow of the Tomb Raider again has it down at the bottom, sharing space with that Nitro V and quite a way behind the Vision 16 Pro. Fortnite again has it at the back, a good 10 to 15 FPS behind anything not power limited or remotely spec comparable. Microsoft Flight Simulator is the same. A kind of painful story really. Like the Helios Neo 16, which also has a 4060 laptop GPU, gets 45% more performance than this Nitro V15. That's not great. Hitman's built-in benchmark lets me break the CPU and GPU data out, and this is the GPU data where we can finally see some differentiation between the 4060 in this and the 4050 in the Nitro V, but honestly not by that much. And considering the Vision 16 Pro manages such impressive performance despite its limited power profile, the V15 kind of stands out, and unfortunately not really in a good way. Unsurprisingly, Siege is the same story. How it's over 50 FPS slower than the Vision 16 Pro, which makes me think that the CPU isn't all that hot for single-threaded games either. And lastly, in Starfield, it is a bit closer. The performance spread across the board here is generally tighter anyway, so that's not too bad. As for the CPU, unsurprisingly, well, it's not that hot either. The 12450H in the Nitro V actually has significantly better single-threaded performance at nearly 1700 points in Cinebench R23 compared to just 1525 points on this 7735HS. Multi-threaded is better, thanks to having 2 more cores, and that carries into the other all-thread tasks like rendering in Blender, but again, not by that much. It's technically faster than the 13700H in the Vision 16 Pro, but that's both power and thermally constrained, especially in the longer Gooseberry render. Power and thermals wise, the 7735HS isn't bad. In the high power turbo mode, it peaked at 65 watts, but was stable at more like 54 watts. It only hit around 80 degrees Celsius too, which is mighty impressive, although the fan noise was frankly unbearably loud both while rendering and while gaming. In fact, have a little listen. As a note, the regular mode is better, but it's still kind of noisy, and that's at the cost of some of the performance, as you get about 10 watts less on the CPU. As for the display, Acer claims this should offer 300 nits and 100% sRGB coverage, neither of which are particularly impressive, although I guess for this sort of price point it is at least pretty decent. Happily, according to the Spider X2 anyway, you can expect about 10% more brightness than claimed at 336 nits, with a decent 4 IPS panel contrast ratio of 1180:1, and right around 100% coverage, in fact technically slightly over, of the sRGB spectrum, and around 81% of DCI-P3. That isn't bad, especially for a more budget gaming laptop. As for the gaming related metrics, by default you'll get a fairly slow panel. While it does run at 165 Hz, the pixels themselves take their sweet time to change colour and therefore actually draw a new frame. By default anyway, this panel takes an average of 9.5 milliseconds to render a frame, which isn't the absolute worst I've tested, those are more like 20 milliseconds, but only 10% of the transitions fit within the refresh rate window, meaning when we look at the high speed footage, you can see that there is at least one ghosted frame on screen alongside the current frame, and possibly even the next one that gets starting rendering, and that takes at least one frame worth of time to draw the current frame too. Now, if you happen to dig around in the NitroSense app, you will find somewhere in there the option for LCD overdrive. You probably want to toggle that on because that drops the initial response time down to just 5 milliseconds, and 73% of the transitions fit within the refresh rate window. That's much better, although the overshoot is impressively high. Take a look at the high-speed footage, you will see that the overshoot is pretty obvious here. It's not really on for long enough for you to notice it like in person in real time, but perhaps Acer could tone it down just a tiny bit to meet a bit of a better sweet spot. But still, on balance, I think I would still leave overdrive on. As for the keyboard, that's fine. It's a little soft for my taste, but it's good enough. It's certainly good for gaming too. The trackpad is the same way, there's no major complaints there. All of that, the performance, the keyboard, the display, all adds together to, frankly, a somewhat confusing gaming experience. The display is pretty decent, smooth, reasonably fast, reasonably vibrant and bright, but the performance it's displaying just isn't there to back it up. It's fine, especially on esports titles, but in more demanding games like Cyberpunk or Starfield, you'd find yourself reaching for low or lowest settings right out of the box. For a £1,000 laptop, I'd like to expect a little better than that. At least with a bit more power, I think this could be great, although a quick look inside reveals why that isn't possible. The heatsink solution here is really pretty limited, with just 3 heat pipes for both the CPU and GPU, with 2 of them being shared as well. This results in an awfully loud and not overly heat efficient solution that means Acer has had to keep the power limits pretty low, because anything higher and you would just overwhelm the cooling package. That's kind of a shame. The good news is that you can upgrade at least the RAM and the storage. In fact, there is a second M.2 slot open for you to expand the wholly insufficient 512GB SSD that this comes with. For context, the sum total of the 7 games I benchmark for these reviews comes to around 566 gigabytes. Meaning, to be able to actually test all of these games for this video, I have to uninstall some of the games before I can install others. I can't imagine only having 512GB of storage in my main PC with how damn big games have gotten. GTA 5 is over 100GB, Starfield is 100GB, Flight Sim is 180GB, wherever the latest COD is I think is 300GB. I mean, that's more than half of the entire storage in this entire laptop. So yeah, if you do get this, stick another M.2 drive in it. As for the battery, that's a frankly tiny 58 Wh unit, which is fine enough for this sort of budget, but let's just say you won't be getting all day battery life from this. I/O-wise, you've got 3 USB-A ports, 1 Type-C port, HDMI, Ethernet, DC in, combo, headphone and microphone jack, and that's about it. On the whole, I'm kind of left a little disappointed by the Nitro V15. I have generally really liked Acer's Nitro V line, of which this is kind of the successor to, so to see this be gaming light, despite being the same sort of price point as before, is a shame. Maybe chalk it up to inflation, but I think this is the reason that you should be really careful to look up the total graphics power figures for any given machine you might be interested in, because the 4060 laptop GPU that's in this won't offer anywhere near the same performance as the same chip, but with nearly double the power. In fact, even from Acer's own product line. It's also just really, really loud. Of course, those are my thoughts, but I would love to hear yours in the comments down below. What do you think of the Nitro V15? Is this a laptop you're interested in, or is the sort of, especially power budget, kind of a limiting factor for you as well? Let me know in the comments down below. I will leave a link to it in the description if you're interested. Maybe at the right price, it might be worth opting for. But yeah, that's kind of it. If you want to see more videos like this one, you can hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell notification icon. Check out plenty of the other videos and laptop reviews and stuff on the end cards. If you want to be able to test stuff like laptops yourself, you can buy my own hardware that I make right here at home, the open source response time tool and open source latency testing tool that I use in a lot of these videos and have been really helpful for me. And so yeah, feel free to check them out. They're at osrtt.com, link in the description. And otherwise, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you on the next video.